Hi, welcome to the podcast. Hey, today we're going to try to look at all the terrible things that happened in the Old Testament and try to figure out why these things took place. A lot of atheists and other critics like to point out some of the stories in the Old Testament as being great examples of how terrible God and his people are. Now, when you read the Old Testament, there's several things you have to keep in mind. Number one, you got to remember you're comparing the Old Testament Stone Age, Bronze Age customs and morals with your own 21st century customs and morals. Now, of course, if you are doing this isn't very wise. You're trying to understand an ancient civilization. Now, maybe you've actually traveled abroad to a foreign country, or maybe you're just a fan of one of those exotic travel shows. If so, you know there can be a great culture shock when you travel from your home to other places. Food, hygiene, expectations of proper behavior can vary greatly once you leave your home. Now, think about the differences you've seen in other countries today and add 3,000 years to that. This is where the critics are going wrong. They try to place their own modern morals, customs, and beliefs on these ancient people. The second thing you got to keep in mind when you're reading these stories in the Old Testament is just because a story appears in the Old Testament, it doesn't mean God condones the actions of the characters involved. Let me give you an example of this. Let's talk about Lot and his two daughters. Now, Lot had two daughters. They are out in the wilderness all alone. The daughters decide to get their father Lot extremely drunk and they commit incest with him. Now, critics like to point out how terrible this is, and I agree, it's just plain wrong. It's wrong today, and it was wrong back then. But the critics are also wrong to claim that God wanted this to happen. He did not bless their actions. He did not instruct the daughters to do such a thing. It's a story in the Bible that just shows humans acting out of their own selfish or evil desires. Now, the third thing you need to know is there's intense good versus evil war going on. Now, most Christians do not realize that this war is a huge part of the Bible. This is what I'm talking about. With the fall of man from the Garden of Eden, a war broke out for the hearts and minds of humans. Okay, with people having free will, they could choose which side to be on. Now, many of the violent acts of the Old Testament are in fact battles in this war. Now, understand that God has set in place a motion to redeem the world via the birth and death of Jesus. Now, of course, Satan's out there. He was trying to stop this. So one of the things he would do, one of his goals was he was trying to stop Jesus from being born. So one of the favorite tactics Satan used in the Old Testament was to attempt to wipe out the ancestors of Jesus. Now, most of the battles in the Old Testament were against enemies that if they had prevailed, they would have prevented Jesus from being born. A good example of this is Noah's flood. Some of the other examples is when the Israelites wiped out whole villages of their enemies. These are nothing more than examples of God protecting his plan of salvation. Even after Jesus was born, Satan tried to kill him. Now remember King Herod and the slaughter of the children of Bethlehem? That was nothing more than an assassination attempt on Jesus. Now one critic has estimated close to 2.5 million people were killed on orders from God. Now, I don't know if this number is valid or not, but what I do know, even if they are valid, the death of 2.5 million people, most of who could be labeled as evil, took place so Jesus could be born and save tens of billions of people. And so, you know what? Well, you get my point. In wrapping up, I offer you this piece of advice. When you see an act of violence in the Old Testament, study it, try to determine whether it's part of this good versus evil war, or study it and try to determine whether or not it's part of the customs of their ancient culture. And finally, you can also study it and try to determine whether or not the act was God's will or just a story of men acting out of their own evil desires. I want to thank you for listening. Take a look at my other podcasts, see if there's something else that might be useful to you. Thank you.